I'd been hiking for about 6 hours when I found the perfect spot to set up camp. Deep in the Cascade Mountains, no cell service, just me and my camera gear for what was supposed to be a simple overnight photography trip. The sun was already setting as I pitched my tent near a frozen creek. I spent the last hour of daylight capturing some shots of the snow-covered pines, then settled in for the night around 9 p.m. That's when I first heard it. "Help me! Please, somebody help me." A little girl's voice, maybe a quarter-mile away through the trees. I unzipped my tent and listened, but all I could hear was wind through the branches. Then it came again, clearer this time. "Help me! I'm scared." I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound without thinking. The snow was deep and my boots kept sinking, but I pushed through the forest following that desperate voice. After maybe 20 minutes of struggling through the darkness, I found an abandoned campsite. A torn blue tent, scattered gear everywhere, and a small pink backpack with cartoon unicorns on it lying in the snow. "Hello!" I called out. "Where are you?" The crying stopped immediately. Complete silence except for my own heavy breathing and the sound of snow falling from the trees. I searched the area with my flashlight, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of where the girl might have gone. It was like she'd just vanished. Then I heard a man's voice from deeper in the woods. "Don't come any closer. Stay away. It's dangerous." My stomach dropped. Was someone holding her? Was this some kind of kidnapping situation? I followed the voice, moving more carefully now. The man kept shouting warnings, telling me to stay back, but I could still hear the girl crying between his shouts. The voices led me to a clearing with an old fire lookout tower in the center. It was maybe 40 feet tall and looked abandoned, but the sounds were definitely coming from up there. I started climbing the wooden stairs, each step creaking under my weight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight steady. "Don't come up here," the man's voice shouted. "They're watching. They're always watching." But I had to help that little girl. When I reached the top, I pushed open the door and immediately knew something was horribly wrong. The room was empty except for an old cassette player sitting on a desk next to the skeletal remains of what looked like a forest ranger. The bones were still wearing a uniform, and there was a badge lying nearby. The cassette player was running, and as I watched in horror, it repeated the exact voices I'd been following. "Help me! Please, somebody help me! Don't come any closer! Stay away! It's dangerous!" It was a loop. A recording. Next to the skeleton was an open journal. I grabbed it and read the last entry by the light of my flashlight. March 15th. They're using the children's voices to lure people out here. I tried to warn everyone with my own recording, but they found me. If someone reads this, don't trust what you hear. Get out. The cameras are everywhere. They're watching. That's when I noticed them. Small cameras mounted in every corner of the room, their red lights blinking in the darkness. Through the windows, I could see more cameras hidden in the trees around the clearing. I was being watched. My blood turned to ice as I realized what had happened. Some kind of trafficking operation was using this tower as bait, playing recordings of victims to lure Good Samaritans into their trap. The ranger had tried to warn people with his own voice on the recording, but they'd killed him for it. And now I was here. I heard vehicle engines starting up somewhere in the distance. Multiple engines. I didn't wait to see who was coming. I smashed the cassette player, grabbed the journal, and ran down those stairs like my life depended on it. The snow slowed me down, but pure terror gave me strength I didn't know I had. I crashed through the forest, branches tearing at my jacket, my lungs burning in the cold air. Behind me, I could hear vehicles getting closer and men shouting to each other. I made it back to my campsite, threw my gear into my backpack as fast as I could, and kept running toward where I'd parked my car on the logging road. The longest 20 minutes of my life. When I finally reached my car and got the engine started, I could see headlights in my rearview mirror, still searching the forest behind me. I drove straight to the nearest police station and handed over the ranger's journal. They said they'd been looking for him for 3 months. The trafficking ring was gone by the time they searched the area the next day, but they found evidence of the operation. Multiple missing persons cases suddenly made sense. I still think about that little girl's voice on the recording. Somewhere out there, a real child had cried for help, and instead of being rescued, her voice became bait for a trap. I haven't been camping alone since then, and I probably never will again. I'd been driving for Uber part-time for about 8 months, mostly late-night shifts to make some extra money. The pay was better after midnight, and honestly, I preferred the quiet hours when most people were already home. It was around 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when I got the pickup request from St. Mary's Hospital. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of night shift workers, visitors, or people getting discharged at odd hours. The passenger's name was listed as Margaret Chin, 4-star rating, no profile picture. I pulled up to the main entrance and waited. After about 3 minutes, a middle-aged Asian woman in a dark coat walked out and got into my back seat without saying a word. She looked tired, which wasn't surprising given the location and time. "Margaret?" I asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She nodded quietly and gave me an address in Riverside, about a 20-minute drive to a residential neighborhood I wasn't familiar with. The ride was completely silent. I tried making small talk a few times, asking how her night was going, commenting on the weather, but she just stared out the window. Some passengers are like that, especially coming from hospitals. I figured she'd had a long night and just wanted to get home. When we pulled up to the address, it was a small single-story house on a quiet street. Most of the houses around it were dark, which made sense for almost 3 a.m. "That'll be $18.50, I said, but she was already getting out of the car. "I'm sorry, I forgot my wallet inside," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you wait just a minute while I get it?" I've had people pull this before, so I was a bit annoyed, but she seemed genuine enough. "Sure, but please hurry. I've got other rides waiting." She walked up to the front door, and I watched her disappear around the side of the house. I sat there checking my phone, looking at the next ride requests. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No sign of her. After 15 minutes, I got out and walked up to the house. The front windows were all dark, and when I knocked on the door, there was no answer. I tried knocking louder, then walked around to where I'd seen her go. The side door was locked, and peering through the windows, the house looked completely empty. Not just dark, empty. No furniture, no signs that anyone lived there at all. I went back to my car and checked the passenger information again. The account showed Margaret Chin, but when I clicked on her profile details, something made my blood run cold. The account had been created 3 years ago, but there hadn't been any rides booked in the last 4 months. I scrolled through the ride history and saw the last trip was from this same address to St. Mary's Hospital on October 15th. I Googled Margaret Chin St. Mary's Hospital on my phone. The first result was an obituary from the local newspaper, dated October 16th. Margaret Chin, age 54, had died at St. Mary's Hospital following complications from surgery. She had lived alone at the exact address I was parked in front of. She'd been dead for 3 months. I sat in my car staring at the obituary photo. It was definitely the woman who'd been in my back seat 20 minutes earlier. Same face, same dark hair, even wearing what looked like the same coat. My hands were shaking as I called Uber support. The representative seemed confused when I explained the situation. She put me on hold, then came back and said there was no record of any ride requests that night from Margaret Chen's account. According to their system, her account had been inactive since her last ride in October, but I had the ride in my app. The pickup location, the destination, everything was there in my trip history. I drove home that night, but couldn't sleep. The next day, I did some more research and found Margaret's old address in the city records. The house had been empty since she died. Her family lived out of state and were still trying to sell it. I also found something else that made my skin crawl. In the local Uber driver Facebook group, I posted about my experience, and 3 other drivers responded with similar stories. All pickups from St. Mary's Hospital, all passengers who seemed real but turned out to be deceased, all ending at empty houses. One driver said he'd had the same passenger 5 times over the past 2 months. Different name each time, but the same elderly man who always got picked up from the hospital and never had money to pay when they reached his destination. The most disturbing response came from a driver who said he'd looked into it further. Apparently, when someone dies at the hospital, their personal effects sometimes sit in storage for months before family can claim them. That includes phones with saved ride-sharing apps. But that doesn't explain how I saw her, talked to her, watched her get out of my car. The Uber support team eventually removed the ride from my history after I filed multiple reports, but they never gave me a real explanation. They just said it was a system error and credited my account for the fare. I still drive for Uber, but I don't accept pickups from hospitals anymore. And sometimes, when I'm driving through that neighborhood in Riverside, I slow down when I pass Margaret's old house. The for sale sign is still in the front yard, but I swear I've seen lights on inside. I just keep driving. It was the promise of quiet that drew me out of the city. 3 years ago, I found a small house for rent on a sleepy suburban street, the kind with manicured lawns and neighbors who waved. It was a world away from the sirens and chaos I was used to. The house next to mine belonged to the Hendersons, an elderly couple who seemed to have been planted there along with the ancient oak tree in their front yard. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson embodied the suburban dream. Within a week of my moving in, she was at my door with a warm smile and a container of what she called her famous beef stew. He was always pottering in the garden, offering friendly advice about my struggling rose bushes. They were kind, gentle, and a comforting presence. The first oddity was the digging. I'm a night owl, and I'd often be up late reading or working. Several times a week, I'd see a single, dim light flick on in their backyard. Through my kitchen window, I could just make out Mr. Henderson's silhouette, methodically turning over soil with a shovel, sometimes well past midnight. Just a passionate gardener, I told myself. Some people are just wired differently. Still, something about the quiet, repetitive scrape and thud of the shovel in the dead of night felt strange. A few months later, an ambulance showed up at their house. Mrs. Henderson had had a serious fall and was taken to the hospital. The next day, a frantic and visibly distraught Mr. Henderson knocked on my door. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands trembling. "I'm so sorry to bother you," he said, his voice cracking. "With Mary in the hospital, I'll be there day and night. Would you be a dear and just keep an eye on the house? Maybe water the plants in the living room for us?" Of course, I agreed. He gave me a spare key, thanked me profusely, and hurried off. That evening, I let myself into their home. The air inside was still and heavy with a peculiar smell I couldn't place. It was faintly sweet, but with a thick, coppery undertone, like an overly floral perfume trying to mask something foul. The house was spotless, almost unnaturally so. Dust-free surfaces, perfectly plumped cushions. It made the smell even more disconcerting. After watering the ferns, I stood in their silent hallway. That strange, sweet metallic odor was stronger here, seeming to waft up from a door leading to the basement. A primal sense of unease crept over me, a feeling that I was somewhere I shouldn't be. But I rationalized it away. Old houses have strange smells. Driven by a curiosity I now deeply regret, I opened the basement door. The smell hit me like a physical wave, thick and cloying. I flicked on the single bare bulb, which cast a sickly yellow light down a set of steep wooden stairs. At the bottom, humming loudly in the damp, cold air, were 3 large, industrial-sized chest freezers. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Why would 2 people need this much freezer space? I tried to turn and leave, to just lock the front door and pretend I never saw it. But some morbid force pulled me down the stairs. The hum of the freezers was a low, vibrating growl in the silence. My hand, trembling, reached out and lifted the lid of the nearest one. The inside was packed solid with white butcher paper parcels, all neatly tied with string. Dozens of them. They looked like something from an old-fashioned butcher shop, except for one thing. There were no labels. No pork chops, no ground beef, no chicken breast. Just anonymous, frozen blocks. A chill unrelated to the freezer's cold washed over me. I picked one up. It was heavy, solid as a rock. A corner of the paper was slightly loose. I pulled it back. Underneath wasn't the marbled red of beef or the pale pink of pork. It was a dark, dense meat, and clinging to the frozen surface was a small patch of coarse, black fur. I dropped it with a cry. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My mind flashed back to the famous beef stew Mrs. Henderson had given me. The rich, slightly gamey flavor I couldn't quite identify. The way she had smiled so warmly as I told her how delicious it was. Nausea rose in my throat, hot and acidic. I stumbled backward, scrambling up the stairs and fumbling with the lock on the front door before bursting out into the clean night air, gasping for breath as if I had just surfaced from drowning. The police came. The investigation uncovered a horror far beyond a simple, grotesque secret. The Hendersons were running an unlicensed pet cremation service. For years, they had contracted with local vet clinics to dispose of euthanized animals. But they weren't cremating them. They were butchering them in their pristine basement and selling the meat to a network of black market restaurants. The stew, the friendly gifts of home cooking, it was all part of their disposal process. That was horrifying enough. But it wasn't the detail that keeps me awake at night. The true terror came from what the police dug up in the garden, in the very spots I'd seen Mr. Henderson digging so peacefully in the dark. It wasn't just random bones. They found several complete, perfectly articulated skeletons of dogs, laid out carefully in the earth as if in some deliberate, ritualistic burial. They were never just getting rid of the evidence. They were doing something else. Something I don't have a name for. The profit from the meat was one thing, but the skeletons in the garden hinted at a darkness, a motive so alien and twisted that I know I will never, ever understand it. And I will never again trust a friendly neighbor.